also get a big kick out of her calling herself a Quakerish wife. And I'm like, someday I'll become a Quakerish wife, I'm sure, but I'll still be able to, tap into my inner Bertha when the time comes.
That's how we should describe nights out now.
Oh my God.
Hey, are we doing like Quakerish wife night or are we doing a Bertha night?
Oh my God, I love it so much. It's like, well, to answer that question, let me just say, by the end of this night, we're going to burn the house down. And welcome back to episode 2 of Air Buds with Piper and Lillian. Lillian, hi.
Hi.
How's it going?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Oh my gosh, I'm so good now that I know that you have seen the story of Jane Eyre from beginning to end in probably the worst format that I could have exposed you to. Do you have any initial thoughts that you'd like to share, or should we maybe kind of jump into the summary of what happened?
I'll do the summary of what happened,
Okay.
Which I did just tell you that you need to correct me if I'm wrong, because I might not get the order of things that happened right, and it's not going to be a very journalistic summary of what happened. It's going to include some color commentary of how I interpret what happened.
Well, that's what we're here for. That's what we're excited to find out.
So where obviously everybody knows we left off was a moment that every girl dreams of, which is your wedding being interrupted by some man. But don't worry, it was the saddest wedding in the world. No one was there.
It was just the two of them and the old man.
The two of them and the old priest. And we find out that Jane cannot marry Rochester because he is already married. And it's to a crazy woman who lives in his attic. And that whole episode, Piper's so surprised. That whole episode is them like going back and seeing his crazy wife, which he keeps locked in the attic, which is actually super fine because it's 1850 and the other alternative is definitely worse. Like being in an institution at that time, for sure worse.
Can you remember his wife's name?
No.
Bertha Mason Rochester.
Bertha Mason.
Yeah.
Pretty much the whole time that they talk about her, they just refer to her as like a lunatic and like an insane person.
Yeah.
So that's what I will also, out of respect, refer to her as.
Perfect. So
so we get like the context of all the things that happened were actually her, and all those mysteries are solved. And then we find out that Jane's uncle is the one who sent this guy whose name is also escaping me, who's a lawyer.
I can't remember that guy's name either. He doesn't matter.
He's not important. And that Jane's uncle is very sick and dying. And then Jane and Rochester get in this big fight while Jane is in her wedding dress, and she goes into her room and she just sort of locks herself away. And then she washes her face. And I know what you're thinking, but do you get to see her with a pitcher pour the water into a bowl and then put it on her face and then dry it off with a towel? And the answer is yes.
Yep.
And then she opens the door, and he is sitting outside the door and immediately grabs her in a way that is fully terrifying to me.
Okay. What's weird about that scene is I feel like the way they film it is that he has his leg sticking out, I think intentionally to trip her. So she walks out, doesn't know he's there, and she trips over his leg, and he catches her and then cradles her in this insane way.
Yeah. And he's very I did have a moment during that slight pause on summary, and then I will talk about this more, I'm sure. I had a moment during that where he tripped her and grabbed her, and I was like, that's not okay. This is not okay. And then she stood up and he towered over her. And I'm like, but that might be okay.
I know, right? And then she gets a little faint and he swoops her up into his arms, and it's like, oh my God.
Yeah. So then he does a lot of essentially making her the villain in his story of him being the victim of, his wife for sure. Mm-hmm. But even Jane, Jane might leave him because he's already married and lied to her about it. But he's the victim of this whole situation. If you really think about it, poor Rochester. And then, so he gives a summary of what happened. He he used to live in, people manipulated him into marrying a crazy woman.
Mm-hmm.
And then he realized she was crazy. They never really loved her, but also wouldn't abandon her, which is like 1 point for Rochester. Then he's just like, Jane, just like, love me. Like, we'll leave this place. We'll go somewhere else. It'll be so good. I already have a house for us. You don't have to live with this crazy woman. I would never do that to you, but I am going to stay married to her. I would never do that to you now that you know that she exists. I would never. And Jane keeps being like, I can't do that because you're married. And he's like, so you don't love me. It was always for my title, you selfish person. And she's like, no, I don't know if you heard earlier, but you are actually married. So I cannot marry you. Then Jane leaves, and I have some thoughts on that. But then she actually leaves. She goes out and finds a stagecoach and pays them all of the money that she can to take them as far as she can. They drop her off in the middle of a field. And she leaves all her stuff on the stagecoach. And she just like is like, this is my plan. She did a good job planning. I feel like things are going really well for her. Then we watch a long, like, I have exact details, but we do not need to talk about them. Basically, she sleeps in some moss. She walks around a town. She looks fine. She's got some flyaways, but otherwise she's fine. But everyone in town can tell she's a vagrant, which is the word they use to describe her. She tries to eat some bread, the gall, and then she ends up like begging outside of this random house, just like crying and begging to get in. And the housekeeper turns her away, which, to be fair, Jane seemed kind of scary and aggressive. And then some strange tall man takes her and brings her in, and she meets all these people, and they're very nice to her. And we learn lots of cool things about them, and they end up taking care of her and nursing her back to health. And then she becomes a teacher and has a cottage, and her life actually seems pretty good.
Yeah.
And at this point, I'm pretty on board with her actually just getting over Rochester and being with this blonde man. And then their uncle dies in a weird way. They thought they'd leave him money because of a whole scandal in their family's past. That's not that interesting, but they feel that they've been wronged. Then continue to find out after Jane does a painting and signs her own name. She's lied about her name to these people.
Yes.
We end up finding out that the lawyer, back up. Yep. Rochester sent someone to the same guy who interrupted his wedding, because they're friends now, because they're both men. And he needs a London man. And so he sends this guy to go look for Jane, and has no success because she gave the same first name and a very slightly different last name, and nobody can solve that kind of mystery.
Yeah. She is the mysterious Jane Elliot.
So once this guy finds out her actual name, it turns out her rich uncle died and left her all the money. And oh my God, twist, guys, she ended up on her cousin's doorstep.
Yes.
And at this point, I'm like, okay, well then it's good that you didn't marry him because he's her cousin. Turns out that is the opposite about how her cousin feels.
He's like, oh yeah, baby.
Not interested in her and now wants to marry her after knowing that she's his cousin, which again, 1850, I'll let it go.
Yeah, well, I'm going to talk about that.
He wants to be a missionary. He says that she is not meant for love. She's meant for work, which is what every girl loves to hear during a proposal.
God.
And then he's pretty upset when she says no to that very romantic proposal. She's like, I'll be a missionary, but I'm not going to marry you because you literally just said that, like,
you don't love me. Yeah.
And you don't love me. And I don't know if you heard earlier, but you are my cousin. And she constantly is referring to her, like, she wants family. So she refers to him as her brother. And he still does want to marry her, though.
I know. So bad.
P.S. This is such a bad recap. P.S. She also inherited 20,000 pounds and insisted that they share it amongst the cousins. So they all got 5,000 pounds. 20,000 pounds in today's dollars, by the way, is just about 700,000 pounds now.
Nice.
Which pounds to dollars, I don't know, but that's where it is.
Still, they're like, you could have a place in society, Jane. They're like, this is great.
You're
and she's like, I don't care. Take
heiress.
some. Yeah.
So she's got a really great life and things are going good other than her cousin who won't stop trying to marry her. And then she finally gives in. And the notes that I have for this are, don't you hate it when your cousin asks you to marry you and you finally say yes, but instead the voice of your ex, your married ex, comes into your mind and you have to run out into a field and yell. Like, super relatable moment that we've all experienced. She hears Rochester's voice. She runs out into a field and yells,
I hear you. Where are you? I'm coming. And her cousin is there and he's like, you're insane. Like, he's like,
and we're all like, no, it's romantic. So then Jane is like super definitely fine. And because she's an heiress, this time she does not end up in the middle of a field. So she goes back to the town that Thornfield is in.
Yep.
And goes to an inn and finds out that Thornfield burned down. And we see a flashback to crazy wife laughing and lighting all the curtains on fire.
Mm-hmm.
And then Rochester's getting everybody out and he's got everybody out and they're outside. And we see her on the roof and she's laughing and he runs up after her because he's a good guy. He's going to save her anyway. He's our truest hero, as we all know. He goes to get her and she yells that she hates him and jumps off the building. And
the end of Bertha.
Yes. And then we luckily do not have to watch her dead body on the ground because the guy telling the story to Jane, we cut back to the present and he goes, and then her body was splattered on the ground. I was like, gross. And then
One's like, ew.
Actually, ew. And then the man says, one of my other favorite quotes in the episode, Jane asks what happened to Rochester. He said, you said he was alive. And then he says, if you can call that living, because Rochester lost one hand and is blind now.
Yes.
And then we go see him with his cool new haircut, which I do think is better.
Oh my God. You like the mullet?
Very 80s.
Oh my God.
His hair. His hair is cool 80s hair.
Are you serious that you like the mullet better?
Than his other hair? Yeah. But I also didn't really like his other hair. Anyway, Jane goes and sees him and there's a whole back and forth. And basically she's like, I'm going to take care of you and we're going to be friends. And he's like, I guess if after telling her to just leave, he changes his mind. Oh my gosh. Sorry.
Oh,
most important part of the episode. She walks into the room. Pilot is back.
Pilot's back.
The last episode. He's there. He barks at her. She's like, Pilot, you know me. And then Roger's just like, Jane.
He hears the voice and he's like, oh, fuck, what?
And I'm like, I would also break character to talk to a dog and get caught. That's how I get caught, is talking to a dog. So then Rochester's like, I don't want to be your friend. I'm going to love you and
be your lover.
After she tries to trick him. And then she like is really happy about it, but she spends some time getting him back for all those tricks he did to her and tries to trick him into thinking that she does actually want to bang her cousin.
No.
And she's like, just kidding. I would love to marry you. And then they get married and they're very happy and he gets sight back in one eye right around the time that they have their first baby.
Yeah, so you can look at that baby.
Yeah. So that's Jane Eyre. And now you don't have to watch it because you just heard me talk about it.
Exactly. And here you thought you wouldn't do good at recapping it. You covered so many details that I would have glossed over. So well done. Bravo.
That's for sure a compliment and not a flaw in my recap. I appreciate it.
Well, no, now our audience knows everything they need to know about this exact version. Do you have initial reactions or should I maybe share some of mine?
I think we sprinkled my initial reactions in. So I really want your initial reactions.
Okay. So the part 2 of the way that we broke up this miniseries includes the scene where Rochester talks to Jane after the events of the wedding. And I think that scene makes or breaks any adaptation of Jane Eyre. I think that's where the movie or the show can say, all right, how are we going to portray his character? Because if you do it right, I think he becomes sympathetic to some extent. And it sort of makes up for a lot of the shit that he did prior, even given this horrible truth that we see him now settled with that he has like revealed. I think if it does it wrong, then he's just a super asshole. These are so many red flags. As soon as you go to sleep, I'm escaping. Like, run, girl, run, get out of there. So I think that scene personally, I think they did a really good job with it. Yeah, like the emotion that's present there is intense. It's kind of visceral, just how much he's emoting. And I also think that she does a really good job. You really see the struggle that she has of her, like how much she loves him. And she even says to him at one point, she's like, I love you all the more, like given everything that I know now. But she's like, I literally can't be with you. Like, stop tempting me. Like, leave me alone. I'm trying to be a good person. I have to go, even though it's killing me. And I love that he has that line where he says to her, he's like, what do you expect me to do? And she's like, suffer. Like, I'm suffering. That's what we have to do now. We have to go out and suffer. But I do really think it's really interesting, kind of this question he brings up is this sort of like, are we going to let our lives be dictated by the rules of man that says, like, because of this marriage contract, you and I can't be together, even though we both know how we feel about one another and everything like that. So I think that scene is really good. The one part I'm not crazy about is like when he's like kissing her and he's like messing up her hair. And it's like literally she has like a veil of hair across her face. And if it was me, I'd be like, like hear your words of love when you're streaming my own hair across my face. And also like the way that he like kind of howls at her at the end, it feels very much like the beast like howling when Belle leaves his castle. But the thing that I think this version doesn't do as good as other versions is when it talks about, you know, the circumstance of how he came to be married to Bertha. Is I feel like I've seen other versions, which obviously we will see and we will discuss, that make it seem more like his father and his brother were complete assholes to trick him into this marriage just to get that lady's money. And that also there are other versions that make her seem not just like a person with a mental illness who couldn't really control anything, but it seems there are other versions where she's more sort of like, seems like she's kind of aware of things. And then the madness came sort of later on. I would also leave if I were Jane. I would hope I have the willpower not to stay. I mean, that's a whole lot to find out the day after your wedding. But yeah, these are some of my initial thoughts about that.
Yeah. And I feel like it's interesting that you find this to be a version where they do a good job of explaining it. And I think that scene is tough because I have zero sympathy for Rochester up until he essentially takes responsibility for what he did with Jane, right? Like, I think we can both agree that if this happened in real life, like we would have left a really long time ago. Yes. Like the part where he says, don't talk to this person while I'm gone is when we're bailing, but Jane is not that girl. So we can't use modern day or like even our own sensibilities on this. Like this is suspending my belief a little bit, believing that I love this man, then these are the circumstances I'm in. I cannot handle the part where he's not accepting responsibility for what happened, like him playing victim of this happened to me. It's like, no, but up until that, sure. But you lied to her actively the whole time she was here. You were tricking her into marrying you. You knew why would you lie if you didn't know she wouldn't marry you if she knew about your wife, because that's not who she is. Like I would not love him all the more. I would be like, cool. I love that you had like your own agenda. Whole thing that you were actively manipulating me the entire time we knew each other. And you decided that your happiness was more important than my ability to make an informed choice.
Well, I do think it's interesting that they talk about that though in that scene. She's like, you can't blame her. She's a crazy person. It's not her fault. And he says to her, he's like, of course you're so forgiving and understanding and you have this great view. And he says, he's like, I should have told you from the start and I know you would have been cool with it. And it's like, yeah, Rochester, maybe if you had done that, this tryst might have worked out. Yeah.
Like, I think she might have run away with him. And like that to me is a really romantic story. Him manipulating her and then being mad at her for leaving after that is upsetting to me.
Yeah.
The moment in the scene that changed it for me, that made me be like, okay, for the first time ever, I'm going to like give Rochester a second, is when he starts to, rather than just talk about his passionate love for her, which I'm like, you don't get to treat people like garbage because you love them. That's not how any of this works.
Right.
The part is when she actually starts to leave and he actually starts to go, to have the emotions of like, I don't know what to, like, I don't know how to handle this. And I messed up and like, please don't leave me. And I love you and we can fix it. Like when he starts to like actually realize she might leave, because up until then he's still in his like arrogant, I'm in charge, I'm in control. And when she like stands her ground for the first time ever in their relationship and says, no, I can't, I have to leave. This is someone else's marriage. I have to leave. And he accepts that that's going to happen. And he starts to melt down about it.
Mhm.
That is the first time that I'm like, I actually feel bad for you. Still, go girl Jane, get out of there.
Yeah.
Maybe make a plan, write a letter to your friend and say, hey, I'm going to come stay with you for a little bit while I figure out a new job. Cause she has people that she knows. Like she has places, It's not like she has nowhere she can go.
Right.
That's how she's acting, is like, she has nowhere to go. And then she gives
go see Bessie.
literally every penny to the stagecoach.
God. Oh my
Why
God.
not give half of your money to the stagecoach and get to an actual town?
See, that's what I was saying. I was like, that was your first big dumb mistake. And I know it's supposed to be like, okay, she's so emotionally distraught that she's just making all these mistakes. But it's like, come on, you have to think to yourself, you can't give every single bit of money to transportation. You need something for food and shelter. These are the basic fundamentals of existing on this planet. And you've just like thrown that out the window.
I'm glancing at my notes from that moment when I'm like watching the stagecoach come down the road. We get to watch it for a long time. And like the whole thing. And then she's just in a field. And the look on her face is just like, literally wrote down, what's your plan, Jane? What's happening now?
One thing that I know that this and also Wuthering Heights takes place on these kind of barren moors. And I thought to myself that the old-timey version of what we now have in our YA fantasy romance novels is when a girl is alone and upset, she runs off to the woods. Apparently back then, you just went out to the moors and did that instead.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you meet your sparkly future husband. So
yeah. And I just love that when women do that, they just get very cold and they need to lay in bed for a while.
Yep. Yeah. That's the best solution. Just find someone handsome comes along, hopefully takes you in, it warms you up.
Yeah. And then be upset, not that everybody called you a vagrant and that this is how they would treat people who like didn't have a home, which that's a whole other thing that we don't do a great job of now either. But be upset that they called you a beggar. That's like her biggest problem with the housekeepers. The housekeeper's like, how long have you been a beggar? And she's like, I am not a beggar. I just don't have any money, don't have any clothes, didn't have anywhere to stay, and was outside begging. That doesn't make me a beggar. And frankly, it's rude.
Yeah, it is odd to me that Jane kind of comes in so like kind of high and mighty in that moment. And yeah, she does seem to be putting herself above the housekeeper, whose name I can't remember, but
she puts herself above beggars.
Yeah.
Which like, again, what would you describe what you were doing? Because you didn't get mad when they called you a vagrant. But the line is beggar.
Yeah, I don't know. Who knows, dude? Before we get too far from what I want to say one more thing about something that you touched on, the one moment where you kind of felt for Rochester. That moment, yeah, where he's breaking down and he's weeping. I think that's an interesting kind of power shift for them, where this entire time he's been above her and he's been flaunting his power. And now that she has this element of control and she's leaving, and the way that he handles that, it's really interesting. I really appreciate his vulnerability. I don't think it's something he would ever really kind of voluntarily show. I mean, maybe now in the future in their relationship together, they can be vulnerable because they've both been cucked and they've both been gaslit. And they're like, we know each other now. It's cool. We've crossed that bridge. But I think that moment of vulnerability is really interesting to see because I think like you could say that the two sort of like, I mean, the two love interests potentially in her life, or the two men in her life who are interested in her romantically, is Mr. Rochester and then her cousin St. John. And St. John, he is so emotionless. Like he's this like stone slab of a man who does what's right by the book, not because he like seems to actually feel anything. And yeah, like you said, his proposal is without emotion. He insults her. Whereas with Rochester's proposal was, calling Jane his equal. And he's like, I found my partner, someone to walk beside me in life. And St. John's like, oh, you can serve me and I'll never touch you. Maybe. Like, I mean, we might have children because that's what God wants, but.
And it's these two extremes too of like, I think if we're putting the contrast between these two characters, he is always honest with her. Like St. John is always honest with her and he's 100% upfront and he says what he wants and he's just like really clean cut and clear and morally like no gray area if we can get over the cousin love. But like, if we're like, if a society at the time, we're okay with that. So he's the morally totally fine, but just like mayo of a person, like so bland. And we just have no, like, so that's where they're sort of saying like, yes, he's passionate in this way that's not okay, but at least he loves her and can say that. And you should accept gaslighting if it means they're hot.
I'm not saying that.
No, I know. I know you're not. And again, like I'll get over it eventually. But yeah, no, I think that that's a great St. John's role in the whole book is to be that, okay, if you're mad about the fact that this person is this, like, you're over this like passion and burning and all that stuff. Like he's the morally better person.
Yeah.
But he's boring.
He's boring as heck. Yeah. Speaking of the cousin love, isn't there an odd kind of old-timey trope? Because the same thing happens in Pride and Prejudice, where her cousin, who's also like a religious figure, comes to marry her or one of her sisters. Like, what's up with that?
Well, marrying your cousin is the boring choice. No,
well,
and
nobody wants that.
I know that this is going to be one of those things where I suddenly sound like the crazy one because you have a real problem with cousin love. Because I know that you like couldn't get over it in Game of Thrones.
It's icky. I don't like it.
And when we talked about one of my favorite historical romances, which is, contextually upsetting, but is Queen Victoria, same time, and Albert, who is, yes, her cousin. So like, that's where I'm like, okay, if we're suspending that, maybe it's a little bit more okay, at least at the time. Yeah, no, I know that's something you'll never just be able to get over. Just like I can't get over his gaslighting her.
And that's cool. We both have our thing.
So I do have a little bit of a segment here that I would like to go into, and it's actually from the whole series. And I've got kind of like my 5 premium descriptors, generally of Jane, although one is of Rochester's wife who dies. And they're descriptors that I would like people to describe me as at some point. This is how, if you're like, ooh, how do I like add some color to my description of Lillian to maybe like a man that I know that I want her to date. This would be how I'd like you to do it. So the first one is, she is a singular person.
Very nice.
Just like, no context. Don't tell them how or why. Just say she's a singular person and let them kind of like get there on their own.
Well, it's like a cool way of saying like, you are one of a kind, you're unique. And it's like, ooh, who doesn't love that?
I don't think from the tone they were using, that's what they were saying. I think they were sort of saying, she's like fine. Like she's, it would be like if I today was saying, like trying to describe somebody to you and I said, I don't know, they're like really interesting.
They're different. Yeah.
They're like really, she's a real singular person. Another one, and this is one that is used to describe her to her face by the man she loves, which is that brow is the enemy. It says, I can live alone if honor requires it. And yeah, I would like my brow to say that to people. I want that to be, when you look at my brow, I want it to say, I can live alone if honor requires it.
When someone's asking me to describe you when I'm talking to your future suitors, they're like, so like, what does she look like? And I'll be like, she has a mighty brow. And they'll be like, whoa.
Her brow, like if you look at her face, the first thing that you think to yourself is, her brow says, I can live alone if honor requires it.
Yeah, she can live by herself. That's what you know when you look at her.
And then this is one that Jane's cousin, who loves her, he doesn't love her. He actively doesn't love her, but he does want to marry her. His first impression of her, when she's sitting in a chair, essentially like collapsing, as everybody else calls her a vagrant and a beggar, he says, grace and beauty are missing from her face.
That brings back, I love so much that both Jane and Rochester are supposed to be like, they are hashtag ugly as heck. like everyone who sees them is like, hey, you're not a very good looking person. And even like Rochester's like, am I handsome? And she's like, no. She's like, I'm not hot. You're not handsome.
And the first thing he asks her when he's like in the chair and she's like coming to and saying she's going to take care of him is like, am I like monstrous? She goes, yeah, but you were before. So.
I love that response. So
like you always kind of were an uggo, so it's fine.
It's fine.
And then this is one again. Please tell strangers this about me. Because this is how he describes when he's first talking about realizing that his wife was not actually a good person. So like he's married her. He thought she was beautiful and lovely. And now he finds out the truth, which is that she's a drunken foul-mouthed and unchaste.
So that's how I would describe drunk Lillian. It's not how I would describe presentable daytime Lillian.
Daytime Lillian, no. Lillian, after, at this point, 2 glasses of wine.
I'm like, oh, here comes Bertha. Amazing.
Yes. I love it.
Great. Oh my gosh.
So that's, So tell people I'm a singular person with a brow that does like a lot of talking, do not have grace and beauty on my face, and that I'm drunk and foul-mouthed and unchaste.
Awesome. I don't have the exact quotes written down, but I think if I had to take quotes from Jane Eyre that I want people to describe me as, I wouldn't mind being described as nymph-like, as Rochester's obsessed as labeling Jane. Like he's always like, oh yeah, you're a thing, like a changeling, a thing from the forest, like this weird little creature. So that's an awful lot. But I also get a big kick out of her calling herself a Quakerish wife. And I'm like, someday I'll become a Quakerish wife, I'm sure, but I'll still be able to, tap into my inner Bertha when the time comes.
That's how we should describe nights out now.
Oh my God.
Hey, are we doing like Quakerish wife night or are we doing a Bertha night?
Oh my God. I love it so much. It's like, to answer that question, let me just say by the end of this night, we're going to burn the house down. I kind of love, and this is like not a fresh take at all. This is something that like is often talked about with the story, but I kind of love Bertha, like taking her life into her own hands and being like, fuck this existence. I'm going to burn your house and I'm going to kill myself. And the last thing she says is like, I hate you. Wee! And jumps off. I'm like, yeah, girl, same.
And honestly, like we can't talk about Bertha too much because I will start to get too real about it. It is effed up.
Oh,
Rochester
so
did her dirty. Like to be fair, like there wasn't a great option for it. At the time, I would definitely be locked in an attic. I mean, this is the same time period where hysteria, do you know about this? Hysteria is the idea that your uterus is traveling around your body, making you crazy.
Yes.
That's
I have heard that.
Calling someone hysterical means. Say I'm hysterical to my face. See how that goes for you.
She's like, this brow's going to tell a whole different story.
His brow's about to tell you a story about how I can live alone if honor requires it.
Okay, I think to do a nice wrap up though, I feel like you probably got a good kick out of Jane kind of giving Rochester a bit of his own medicine at the end there. How'd you feel about that?
What I really enjoyed was because of Rochester being blind, we get to see more of what I think in the books you're probably getting the impression of in Rochester's head when he's gaslighting her, which is like she's smiling, like this is her, the way she does it feels a little bit more like fun and flirty, where I think we're supposed to think that Rochester gaslighting her is fun and flirty. I don't really find it that way, but like the way she does it is like, oh, I don't know. Of course I liked my cousin. He was a good, honorable man who was honest about like highlighting all the things that we talked about how they're different. And Rochester's like, I guess like that's who you deserve. And she's like, yeah, but he was also my cousin and like so boring. He was blonde and tall and blue-eyed and scrumptiddlyicious.
Oh my gosh. I loved that moment where he's sitting in the chair, like right after she's like first come to see him and she's told him a little bit. And like right before she goes, he like kind of like gets all tense and he's like, Jane, were there any men in your company? And she's just like, maybe there was
gone for a few years, but I was in a town full of single ladies and it was totally normal and fine. And everything was great.
Oh my God, so funny. I think the actress's portrayal in that scene, in that whole like kind of chunk, I like it and I don't like it. I think it's a little odd to me that she seems to be enjoying herself so much, but I also totally understand that. I don't know.
And I think the difference to me between how she does it and the enjoyment she gets is like, she came back for him. Like she's marrying him. Like there is no question, like there's no secrets between them anymore. Like there's no barriers between them being together. She's just like kind of giving him shit for his insecurities and being like, you think that you're some monstrous whatever now because you don't have a hand and you're blind. And like the idea that Jane wouldn't marry him because of that is genuinely laughable to me.
Right.
Seriously. And so that's where it's a little bit more fun.
That's a really good point, Lillian. Before she even, I think, found out that Thornfield had burned down because she heard his voice and she ran off to find him. I think it was pretty much destined at that point. She's like, if he asks again, I'll run away with him to that house in France. And so to then find out that he is in need of help and she has kind of like a hand up, I think she's like, oh, well, this is even better than I thought it would be.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, of all the things that people describe Jane as and her willfulness and passion that I don't always see, her being somebody who would love you unconditionally, even if you have these horrific, like, is it really living slight scars and you're missing a hand and you're blind, which is, I'm not diminishing that in a difficulty of living way, but in a, so you're a monster now? That's a little harsh.
I mean, for Timothy Dalton, that might be hard because he is quite handsome, but he still looked cool. They gave him a very like edgy anime eye scar. So, you know, he's still like on a bunch of girls' binders. And by
that, we do mean Piper's binders.
Yeah, edgy middle school me definitely would have printed off a picture of this guy and like taped it to my math book. Awesome, dude. Okay, well,
I want you to do your rating first.
Okay.
And what did you do you want to do just the last few episodes or the whole thing?
Well, so we already rated part 1. I think let's rate part 2 separately. Okay. And by that we mean episodes, I think, what is it, like 8 through 11?
Yeah, it was 1 through 7 and then 8 through 11.
Awesome. Okay. I would give this, I think, 5 out of 10 Timmy D's, because the passionate like scene between him and her when he's telling the story and he's, you know, begging her not to go, that gets me so hard. I have that video on YouTube saved into like a folder full of just like romantic clips that I play sometimes when I'm feeling sappy. And so that one I love to pieces. So that gets it up to a 5. But the fact that we have to spend so much time watching her just like suck at running away. Just like, this is so boring and dull. I don't like it. So yeah, it gets 5 out of 10 Timmy D's for me. How about you?
I think I'm going to give it 6 out of 10 Pilot the dogs. It would have probably been 5, but at the end we get to see Pilot the dog. And I really think that as much as I would love to make the scale about something else, it's really about dogs for me.
Yeah.
And I actually found it interesting to watch Jane. The running away part, you're right, was dumb and tough to watch someone be that dumb. But I liked her building a life away from him.
Yes.
And I liked how much agency she had in the choice to go back to him.
Yes.
Which was part of what was hard about the first part, is how little agency she had in that, where this I really enjoyed.
Nice. I like that. I'm realizing, Lillian, that I mean, listeners, obviously, you know, you can see the cover art for our podcast. We've got this golden retriever concept. So clearly, I think the adaptation that does not exist but should, because it would surely convert Lillian to the team Jane Eyre, would be the Air Bud all golden retriever puppy adaptation of this classic novel. That's what we need.
If dogs are gaslighting people, other dogs, that's acceptable to me.
Okay. Yeah.
Age difference between dogs is fine.
Yeah. Lillian's like, whatever. You can't really tell. They only live to be like 10 anyway.
It's fine.
It's fine. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, thank you so much for enduring very long scenes of people walking slowly from one end of a room to another and wandering in the middle of nowhere. I hope that some of the fashion and the passionate moments and great zippy one-liners that were not meant to be funny, but we loved, got you through it. But this is just part 1, Lillian, of a very long journey that we are embarking on.
Well, and I think because obviously everybody is watching 1,000 adaptations of Jane Eyre. I think we've talked about the next one we would do would be Jane Eyre, the 2011 version.
Correct. With Michael Fassbender.
Yeah.
And,
which might be too scary for me.
I think you'll handle it. We can see it together. I'll hold your hand. I'll tell you when the scary parts happen.
Because I know the plot, right?
Yeah. Now you can expect all the jump scares.
Great.
But yeah, so look into that. Thank you guys for listening to part 1 and 2 of our pilot, the dog pilot episode of Air Buds. We do have an email in case you have thoughts that you care to share or would like to request the next version that we're going to watch. You can always reach out to us. We are airbuds@gmail.com, and it's spelled like the podcast. And there might be some social channels coming later on, so you can engage in other ways, but time will tell. Like Lillian's eventual love for the story, we're taking our time to build this podcast up to the global sensation it one day will surely be.
Yes. This is the podcast we've all been waiting for.
It's true. It's so true. Yeah.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you guys. We'll check in next time. See you later.